According to Hutchinson and Waters 1987, there are three reasons common to the emergence of all ESP. First, the demands of a brave new world. Second, a revolution in linguistics. And lastly, the focus on the learner. Hutchinson and Waters noted that two key historical periods breathe life into ESP. First is the end of the Second World War, and second is the oil crisis. At the end of the Second World War brought with it an age of enormous and unprecedented expansion in scientific, technical, and economic activity on an international scale for various reasons. Most notably, the economic power of the United States in the post-war world, the role of international language fell to English. The oil crisis of the early 1970s resulted in Western money and knowledge flowing into the oil-rich countries. The language of this knowledge became English. The general effect of all this development was to exert pressure on the language teaching profession to deliver the required goods. Whereas English had previously decided its own destiny, it now became subject to the wishes, needs, and demands of all people other than language teachers. The second key reason cited as having a tremendous impact on the emergence of ESP was a revolution in linguistics. Whereas traditional linguists set out to describe the features of language, revolutionary pioneers in linguistics began to focus on the ways in which language is used in real communication. Hutchinson and Waters point out that one significant discovery was in the ways that spoken and written English vary. In other words, given the particular context in which English is used, the variant of English will change. This idea was taken one step further. If language in different situation varies, then tailoring language instruction to meet the needs of learners in a specific context is also possible. Hence, in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, there were many attempts to describe English for science and technology, or EST. Hutchinson and Waters identify Ewer and Latour, Swallace, Selenker, and Tribal as a few of the prominent descriptive ESP pioneers. The final reason Hutchinson and Waters cite as having influenced the emergence of ESP has less to do with linguistics and everything to do psychology. Rather than simply focus on the method of language delivery, more attention was given to the ways in which learners acquire language and the differences in the ways language is acquired. Learners were seen to employ different learning strategies, use different skills, enter with different learning schemata, and be motivated by different needs and interests. Therefore, focus on the learner's needs became equally paramount as the methods employed to disseminate linguistic knowledge. Designing specific courses to better meet these individual needs was a natural extension of this thinking.
Now, let's move on to the three types of ESP, which are the English as a restricted language, English for academic and occupational purposes, and English with specific topics.
Now we're gonna discuss syllabus. So according to Yulay Lawati, the syllabus is a set of plans and arrangements for the implementation of learning and assessment, which are arranged systematically, containing interrelated components in achieving mastery of basic competencies. So a syllabus is a document that outlines the content, objectives, organization, and assessment methods for a specific course or educational program. So it typically includes details such as the topics to be covered, required gradings, assignments, grading criteria, and schedule of classes. Next, Let's discuss syllabus design dimensions. We have 7 designs. These are the course rationale, describing entry and exit level, choosing the course content, determining the scope and sequence, planning the course structure, needs analysis, and editing. When we say course rationale, it provides a short explanation and of why the course is made. Next is entry and exit. So describes the level of language mastery of the course and the expected level when finish the course or program. Next we have is choosing the course content. So this is a list of the possible topics, units, skills, and materials, and many more. Determining the scope and sequence. So scope explains the breadth and depth of materials, topics, units, and skills which have been selected. Next we have is planning the course structure. So it involves 2 processes. They are selecting a syllabus framework and developing instructional blocks. Then syllabus frameworks are types of syllabus. Now let's have needs analysis. So curriculum and syllabus are designed to meet the needs of the learners. And last one is editing. The main aims of editing are to remove any obstacles between readers and what the author wants to convey, and to find and solve any problems before a book or a text goes to a typesetter. Did you know that there are 2 types of syllabus? These are the linear syllabus and cyclic or spiral syllabus. When we say linear syllabus, it is a product-oriented syllabus that moves from one discrete item to the next. And when we say cyclic or spiral syllabus, it is a form of learning that encourages the revisiting of topics and key concepts, building on previous course material in a cyclical and spiral. Now let's have the different kinds of syllabus. There are 10 kinds of syllabus. These are the organizational syllabus, internal syllabus, uninterpreted syllabus, external syllabus, learner syllabus, evaluation syllabus, interpreted syllabus, material syllabus, teacher syllabus, and classroom syllabus. So when we say organizational syllabus, it is a document that outlines the structure, policies, and procedures of an educational institution or organization. Next is internal syllabus. It refers to a syllabus designed for internal use within an educational institution or organization. It may include detailed information about course content, objectives, and assessment methods specific to that institution. Third is an interpreted syllabus. So this is a syllabus that presents the course content and objectives without additional explanation or interpretation. It provides the basic outline of what will be covered in the course but does not offer guidance or context. Fourth one is external syllabus. So it is a syllabus intended for external stakeholders such as accreditation bodies, employers, or other educational institutions. It may provide information about the curriculum, learning outcomes, and assessment methods to the external parties. Fifth one is learner syllabus. So it is a syllabus that is tailored to the needs, interests, and learning styles of the students in a particular course. Sixth one is evaluation syllabus. It focuses on assessment methods, grading criteria, and evaluation procedures for a course. It outlines how students will be evaluated and graded based on their performance in the course. Seventh is interpreted syllabus. It includes explanations, annotations, or interpretations of a course content, objectives, or expectations. It may provide additional context or guidance to help students understand the material better. Eighth is material syllabus. So this refers to the actual content, topics, and materials covered in a course. It outlines the specific subject matter that will be taught and may be included, required readings, assignments, and activities. Ninth is a teacher syllabus. So this is a syllabus created by the instructor or teacher of a course. It reflects the teacher's approach to teaching, including their teaching philosophy, instructional methods, and classroom policies. Last one, classroom syllabus. So it is a syllabus that outlines the rules, expectations, and procedures specific to a particular classroom or course section. It may include information about attendance policies, classroom behavior expectations, and communication protocols.
Moving on to our next point, which is the language description, we have 5 major stages of development in language. The first one is the classical or traditional grammar. They describe language in terms of case-based, like nominative, genitive, dative, and instrumental cases. Traditional grammar is seen as a prescriptive grammar because it is rule-governed. It is seen as word grammar because it fails to show language as an integrated systemic event. Next, we have the structural linguistics. Structural or descriptive linguistics school emerged in the 20th century, around the 1930s to 1950s. It is characterized by its emphasis on the overt formal features of language, especially of phonology, morphology, and syntax. The third one is the transformational generative grammar. In 1950s, the School of Linguistic Thought, known as a transformational generative grammar, received wide acclaim with the publication of Noam Chomsky's Syntactic Structures in 1957. We also have the language variation and the register analysis. Language variation explores how language changes across regions, social groups, and context, while register analysis examines how language adapts to different situations and audiences, ranging from formal to informal settings. Both concepts help understand the diversity and appropriateness of language use. The last one is the functional or notional grammar. It focuses on the communicative functions and meanings conveyed by the language rather than solely grammatical structures. It emphasizes the roles of language in communication and how different language elements fulfill a specific function within the context.